All right. Thanks, Mark. This is Doug Johnson. A lot of you probably know me already, and it's a little unusual to see me in a developer conference, but I made the cut. So Mark invited me, and I'm happy to kick off some of the information that we're going to do about our new workflow engine. This is the state workflow engine. The agenda here is I'm going to go over some of the brief history and why we did it, why we came up with it. But the heart of the the heart of the session is the demonstrations. I'll be doing the UI demo, so I'll be configuring, setting up a scenario and configuring it using the UI. But then your payoff for that is Alex is going to show you the development side of that. So he's going to show you some of the code that was behind that. And then he's going to go ahead and show you as well some of the new things that you can do and how to actually add and contribute to the workflow engine using code. Assuming we have time at the end, I'll go through some customer examples. And then just as important, this is a relatively new feature. So I'm going to hit on some of the things that are new and what's coming at the very end if we have time for that. So let's go ahead and dive into it. So I want to do, some of these are just very basic introductions, but in terms of, I always get the question, what can I do in workflow in Acumatica, especially in the sales process? And honestly, there's a lot of things. You have preferences, which are just check boxes within the preferences screens, and that impacts workflow. You have assignment and approval maps. I have one slide that shows how that fits into everything. And then we have the state workflow engine. So the state workflow engine is, allows you to go into the UI and modify the workflows that are associated with the data entry screens. So you'll see examples of that today. And then last but not least is the code, which can impact the state workflow engine. And of course, you can build your own workflows and customize basically anything you want using the Acumatica framework. There's a help file that shows some of that. I'll reference that at the end as well. So if you see something that tweaks your interest and then you want to go through something on your own in a step-by-step with screenshots, we'll show you that at the end. So once upon a time, we developed this workflow engine. It was called the automation engine. It was a no-code solution, which allowed you to modify the states and other things associated with screens. This was a nice tool why it worked, but a couple of years ago we started getting rid of that. Mostly because there were some complexities associated with it, and it didn't work with the developer community. If you had to, do upgrades, or if you had to, change things in code, it wasn't necessarily possible. So some of what we're showing today is how, the UI, this is not the same UI that we're going to be showing. This is the old one. But as you replace these old workflows that you built with the new state workflow engine, all of this can be coded and changed by developers as well. The state workflow engine, simply put, you can see it's got screens, workflows. Each screen can have specific states associated with it. I have some slides that talk through that and work through it. The event handlers and actions can be applied. Fields can be changed before or after you leave states. And then most importantly are the transitions. So you can set up conditions and triggers that cause transitions to fire automatically, or you can have them as part of action buttons and other things that convert from one to the other. One of the nice things about the new state workflow engine is that there's a basis for it, which is you can have, as we upgrade the application, all of your core workflows change. So it ships out of the box with workflows, and then it allows you to extend those. So you can extend the workflows just like you can extend the application. Remember, the old workflow engine didn't allow that. So this is one of the things where you can upgrade the system. Your existing changes will ride on top of what you've done so that you don't have to go ahead and worry about upgrades as much as you did with the old workflow engine. All right, so from a real basic perspective, we have a data entry screen, as you can see, and each data entry screen can have different workflows. Typically, the workflows are based on a state identifier, which is often a status, but may also be a class, and it's definable in many cases. You can make it what you want, but think of it as, the states are most often what you're going to be using for those. So each data entry screen can have multiple workflows depending on some of the values or states on the particular screen. The state itself consists of, basically it's a simple identifier. It's a holding place that maintains whatever your workflow identifying field is. And then recently we've introduced parent states or composite states as well. And Alex's example later is going to show you how to take advantage of those to simplify the coding associated with screens, especially in the financials area. To move from one state to the other, you can have certain transitions, and transitions can be triggered by actions, handlers. There can also be conditions that cause those to fire automatically. So all these things are included as part of the new workflow engine. And then most importantly, now you guys, the developer community, can get your hands on the workflow and do it within code. And as I said, there's an example that exists out there, which we can show. It's the adding assignment to opportunities. This will also be in the references at the end, but you'll see it's just in our normal help file associated with Acumatica. And if you need to, so if you don't see everything you want to see today, this gives you another example that you can run through to go see what you got to do. Mobile is also part of the new workflow engine. Your states and other things are, of course, carried through to the mobile phone. They have the new action here on your actions you can expose to mobile, which means you can call those particular actions from your mobile phone as well. Now, before I get into my examples, I have two more slides. The first is describing approvals. So approvals are like a detour. So you're going along all these gray boxes are an example of your states that you have associated with a particular screen. We have the workflow engine, which is basically this detour that you can go through, and then you can describe and do an assignment or an approval map, which then goes through and brings you back into your workflow. So think of approval engine as very specific a workflow that you can call out as a detour, kind of a side branch to the normal workflow that we're going to be showing you. In terms of the history buffs out there, here's how the migration to the new workflow began. It started in 2020 R1, and we started adding more and more screens and features to it. In 21 R1, it was mostly all implemented. In 22 R1, we grabbed the financial screens and added composite and parent states, as I already mentioned. And we have some new changes coming in 22 R2, but I'm going to make you wait till the end before we actually go through that. All right, so with that as a preamble to what the workflow engine is, what it looks like, and more about it, let's get into some examples of what it would be. So I'm going to run through a simple example. We have inspecting purchase receipts. So when you get a purchase order in, you would normally have a purchase receipt that gets created. Right now, the purchase receipts is a fairly straightforward process. You go in, let me pull in just the standard function here. I believe I have a purchase order created already. It's ready to receive. So the standard functionality is you hit this enter PO receipt, and you can go off and you see it's in the balance state, and then you can go ahead and release it, and it makes all the updates to inventory, as well as if you want to, it can even create a vendor bill. So that's the default out of the box scenario. So what we want to do instead is we want to add some more flexibility to that to have an inspection take place. So you would come in, you would create a new action called inspect. Inspect would send it to, an inspection state that would then create somebody could go in, perform the inspection, and if the inspection would have two options, you could successfully perform it. If it's successful, maybe you want to put the notes, for example, or the results of the maybe some parameters or other things in a results note field. If it fails, then you can put it into like a quarantine and bring it back. So that's the basis for what we're going to be doing. So what that's going to look like from a state diagram perspective is out of the box we have this initial state which kicks things off and pushes things based on existing values to the appropriate place within the workflow. We're going to have a typical on hold. It goes to balanced, and then what we used to have was you had a release which tossed it all the way down here to released. So now where you can see I'm going to add a couple new states here that you see. Go in, add some actions, manage some transitions, add a dialog box, and if all goes well, I'll be able to compile that and run it for you. So let's go ahead and get this process started. So now this is the UI version that we're going to do. So let's go to customization projects. I'm going to create a new one. And we're going to go ahead, open that guy up. Hopefully my typing improves as this goes along. We're going to customize our existing screen. Purchase. No, it's not. There we go. So we're going to go grab the purchase receipt screen. And as some of you are probably already familiar with, you now have this area called workflows that appears here in the visual UI editor. So we're going to go here into workflows, and we're going to add a new one. So we're going to extend the system. We could create a brand new one, we copy, but what I want to do is extend this existing standard workflow that we have. I'm going to call this one inspect receipt. And it creates it. Now you have to remember to activate this guy. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Now let's dig into the bones of the inspect receipt workflow and start adding the different objects that I was talking about as far as that state diagram. Now you see here I can add states from here. Since I'm not a developer, I'm going to go and I want to keep it super simple. I want to go in here and use this nice picture to do things. So I'm going to go ahead and add my states first. So we'll call this one, we need an identifier for it. I'm just going to call this one I for inspect. We also introduced parent states. I won't be using those in this case. Then I can go ahead and add another one. So once it's inspect, I want it to go into inspected, where people are waiting to count it up and move it. And then last but not least, if we fail, I guess I could have called this one quarantined as well. But that's the simple process of adding states. Now, these didn't appear in a particularly happy place for me where I wanted them to be. So you can drag and drop things around to do this. So let's go ahead and move inspected up here. And I'll move failed. And now we can get everything in a fairly big screen that should do what we wanted. Okay, so now the next thing I need to do is I need to start creating actions and transitions. So the first thing that obviously would make sense is that I need to go ahead and create some capability to get from this balance state over to inspect. So I'm going to go ahead and drag something. So I'll start here and drag it over to this guy and create a new trigger. And I'm going to hit create a new action is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to call my action inspect. And you can see I have the option to add dialog boxes. I'm going to add this to my actions menu in that drop down menu that you get, and go ahead and hit OK. and that's done. Next, after I inspect something, you want it to go down to inspected. So we're going to add this. We'll call this, we'll create another one. And do that. Same deal. Bear with me while I complete some of the rest of this. We might go to, I don't want to take too much time. I want to get into the code sooner than later, but we'll see if I can finish this up quickly. Now, if we fail, okay, so now we're getting everything organized. And let's see, I've already got that one. I don't want to do that. Let's organize things here a bit better. Now, the other thing I want to do is after it's inspected, this is where we used to go directly from balanced down to released. So within this state, I'm going to want to get it down, get a process down to released. Now, in this case, you'll notice I'm going to click this button called Event Handler. The reason I want to do this is because the handler is going to be needed because when I go in here and I create the receipt, there's impacts to other screens. Actions are typically one screen things. The event handler's good to use in case you go to some other area or impact values on another field. So I'm going to go add that handler. The other thing that I probably want to do as well is I'm going to go trash this direct line from balance to there. So let's get rid of that guy and delete him. Last, let's say I need to get out of where I am. So if I fail, I want to be able to send it back to on hold. And to do that, and we'll go, let's do hold, put on hold for this guy. And I think that gives me a fair number of things that I can do. I actually, let's do one more. If I can put an on hold back from this guy as well. Okay, now, so that's what give me some of the basics of my workflow, so I'll save that. So you'll see I've created 3 actions. I can also go in, by the way, and within my dialog box, I can add a new one. We'll call this I just need to think of some clever name for my my action here. I'll just call it inspect quality. So this is going to measure the quality of my inspection. I'm going to have a dialog box pop up. And I'm going to create a new field, which is a combo box. And inspect quality. And save, add some values. We'll do something really simple. In terms of quality. So now I've got some values that I've created as part of this as well. So these are all different things that you can do within this workflow engine. Now, if I go back, let me go back to my workflow. And I'm going to go back into my diagram view. And within there, I want that quality basically to pop up when I go from the inspect. If I pass it, I want the quality to be measured when it goes to inspected. I could also add that in other places. So I'm going to go edit the state from here. And you'll see that here's where my action is. And you can see I don't really have any dialog boxes here. The other thing about these is I might want these to actually appear on the that you can control the way the buttons show up. So if I want to pass this, I'll do this one as a success, and I'll do this one as red, just to make that happen. And I'll say, okay, that looks great. And then when I pass something, I'm going to go to my, oops, warning, I didn't save that. So I'm going to do one more thing here before I publish this. I'm going to go to my inspect pass. And I'm going to add that dialog box I created. Oh, And now that I've added the dialog box, that's going to go grab the value. I made one other mistake that I forgot. Now that I've grabbed the value, I need to assign that value to something. So that's where I want to go into this inspect area. And I'm going to edit the state again. And this time, when I exit this particular state, I'm going to assign a value. We'll just put it to the note text field. And I'm going to cheat now. This is where you would go through and you could pick all the different things and build your area and make something look pretty. Or you can do what I'm going to do right here to save some time and simply cheat. And let's see, I called that all right. Yeah. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that. So that'll just assign a value for me. All right, so let's go ahead and save this. And without further ado, we're going to go ahead and publish this project, which will then go ahead and push all these changes, and then we'll see what my new workflow looks like within the when I do a purchase receipt. The other things why this is happening, I've got some good examples of customers doing this and using it. I'll get to those after this happens if it starts taking a little too long, because my machine loves Ring Central and the resources involved. I might go do some other ads in the meantime. Let's see if there's anything else I want to cover. I think that's good. We just got to wait for it to fire away now. Need to borrow Gabrielle's Spotify app. As soon as this gets published, we'll go run. Odds of me succeeding. Usually in a demo such as this where I'm rushing through it, I give myself a 25% chance, so we'll see how that goes. I promise not to send you through a troubleshooting activity, but instead we'll turn it over to Alex and he'll show you how to do all this in code. Maybe since this is taking a while, now it's time to show you the cooked version of what this looks like. If that one doesn't, we'll give it a minute. This is the fully cooked version. So let me go to my purchase orders here. And if everything goes according to schedule, I'll be able to go in, enter a purchase order receipt. And you'll see now I have this new option for inspect. So that's where I said you can add the buttons up top. After you do that, you can see I can go to the pass fail. If I fail it, it'll change this state over here, and it'll go back through the failed state, in which case I can maybe fix it, put it back on hold, go back through inspection, and this time we'll go ahead and pass it. This is the pop-up box that we put into it. Maybe we got a good result from doing it, and then the pop-up box is able to update that field. So this is an example of things that you can do using the workflow engine, and presuming that this thing will eventually crank through and do it, I could show you it on my local host as well. But instead of going through all that, I think I'm waiting for that. I think I'm just going to head back to the PowerPoint and turn it over to Alex, who's going to do another scenario for you he's going to show you how this all works in code. So remember, the important part about moving to this new mechanism was that now we can do it in code. And he's going to go through this scenario with you. He's going to look at a financial screen and he'll walk you through the rest of the details of it. Alex, you ready to go? I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to you, if that's all right.
Yes, thank you, Doug. Let me share my screen.
Looks good.
Yeah, okay. So hello, everyone. First of all, I want to show you the code that implements exactly the same changes that Doug introduced through user interface. So here we have a graph extension class that extends payroll receipt entry functionality. We override configure method here to introduce our changes in code. We get actions category here, introduce 3 new actions, inspect action, and we give it a display name, put it in category, and we have 2 more actions here. It's inspect fail and inspect pass actions. And for inspect pass actions, we add some field assignments. We put the value for note ID field of PO receipt Doug, the same value as Doug used, the same expression that Doug used in the user interface. And then we update the screen configuration and update the workflow for the PO received. We go to the state section, and here we add 3 states. Inspect state with some configuration for actions. We want to enable inspect pass action and inspect fail action here, and we want to duplicate them in toolbar, and we want to add some connotation for them here. And we also add inspected and failed actions with the actions that are available in these states, and with one available workflow event handler. And we also have to update balance state and add inspect action to its configuration to make this action available in balance state. Also, we made some changes in transitions section. We add all these transitions to link all new states together. Here are all these changes. And also, we have to modify transitions for balance state. We add 1 state from balance to inspected state for the triggered by inspect action, and remove existing state from balance to release state. And also in the end, we add these 3 actions to the whole screen configuration. And we also have to provide new combo box values for status field of the PO receipt Doug entry. It is made automatically in user interface when you add states on diagram or in tree editor, but here in code, we have to provide them with direct code. But now we will try to do something completely new. We will customize invoices and memos workflow, and as Doug mentioned earlier, do the following. We will change the order of 2 states, pending email and pending print. Currently, we have to print the invoice and only then email it. Let's suppose that we want to change the order. Next, after pending email state, we want to introduce additional state where someone will review the invoice, especially paying attention to the specific fields such as detailed total or cash discount. Let's call this state pending review. We won't implement approval process here, so there will be no approve or reject actions. We just want to be sure that someone done the review. And we also want that if some fields are changed, for example, field detailed total, our invoice will return back to the review state, even it was reviewed before. So let's quickly look how it works by default right now. Here I have invoice screen. I need to mention 2 things. I have changed the default settings for the site. So I enabled hold documents on entry flag on accounts receivable preferences screen. And for the customer alter ace, I've enabled send invoices by email flag and print invoices flag. So now we will choose customer here and add some details in the grid. And add quantity and unit price. Save the result. So now if we press remove hold button, we can see that our invoice moved from on hold state to pending print state. Here we can press the print button. And a special print form of the invoice will be generated. Yeah, I agree with Doug that with sharing screen, everything
RingCentral
works
does
slower.
not cooperate
Yes,
with local
slower
hosts.
than expected, yes. Okay, here is the form. We will return back. And now we can see that our invoice moved to the pending email state. We can email it right now. And after it, we will be moved to the balanced state. Yeah, here it is. So if we now press the hold button, we will put the document on the on hold state. And if we remove hold, it will jump to the balanced state because it's have been already emailed and printed. So one thing to mention here that we will implement this scenario in 2021 R1 release, where new sequences and they are also called composite states or parent states are introduced. So we will start with creating of the new cache extension and graph extension classes. And first of all, we'll add all necessary usings here, including one static using bounded to static using that will reduce amount of code that we will write below. Then we'll define the cache extension class for AR invoice doc class that will add one more field, user reviewed field, that will store the reviewed mark. One thing to notice here is that I've already added a column to my database to store these fields values. So here is this field. And we'll also want to define this new pending review status here. So here I will create a special class to hold this and to use this class later in workflow. And I will also give it a name I, because R is already used for credit hold status. Now, as we want to run workflow on changing one of the fields of the invoice, and we will observe two fields, we will create a special class that just combines those properties together. Here, for example, we will subscribe on changing of the query origin document amount property of our invoice doc. It's detailed total field, and query origin discount amount field. It's a cash discount field of our invoice. So we will later use this class to generate workflow event. Now we are ready to create a graph extension class that will implement workflow customization logic. As it will change existing workflow configuration, we will reference AR invoice workflow extension here too. Let's introduce new action that will be used to mark current invoice as reviewed, and we will left the body of this action empty, as we will put all the logic of this action into the workflow itself. One more thing we should do, we will create a special condition class that will hold a new condition for us, is inspected, that checks that user reviewed field is equal to true. We will use it to skip the pending preview state if the document was already reviewed. So now we are ready to start customizing workflow. So as usually, we need to override the configure method and I created another configure method here, as we usually do with workflow context class with exact types for AR invoice entry graph and AR invoice doc here. So first, let's take all necessary objects we need to for the screen configuration context here. From the screen configuration context here. So what we need a processing category. We will put, it's already defined in the workflow, so we just get it. And we will put our new action in this processing category later. And we will get the class for our conditions, condition, to use this condition also a little bit later. Next, we will define logic. We will define logic for our mark reviewed action. We will put it to the processing category, and we will add some field assignments. We will set user reviewed field that we introduced earlier with the true value. One more thing to define before is a special workflow event handler. We will create a new, as we want to run workflow when one of the fields changed, we should create new workflow handler, and we give it a name on update query orange handler that subscribes it on changing of any fields defined in this on update query orange class. So in our case, there are two fields. Yes, it's a details total and I forget the name of this property, something like discount total. And we set up that it should run workflow for the record that fired this event. And as an action, update field user reviewed with the false value. Then we will change the screen configuration. Here we call update screen configuration for our AR invoice entry. We will update the default flow in there, and we will have two sections with flow states where we will define changes for states, and with transitions section where we will define changes in transitions. We will update, first of all, we will update the definition for our sequence, hold to balance sequence. We will activate our new handler that is created above on update query orange handler on the level of the sequence. So as child states of the composite state inherits most of the settings of the parent composite state, it will lead to activating of this handler in all child states too. It allows us to significantly reduce the amount of code we need to write, and also reduce a chance to mistake here, or maybe in any following customization where we can forget to activate this handler in some state. Yes, because we might even don't know that there is some handler we need to activate. And we will also make some more changes here. In states of in child states of sequence. We will update the pending email state and place it after the credit hold state. Now we have the following order of states: hold, pending email, pending print, and balanced. While previously we can add states in any order, in sequences, order of the child states is very important. Because we moved, when we moved into the sequence, workflow engine will move over its childs and check their skip conditions, if any exists, and to find, to find out the first state where it should stop. And also we will add our new state here, pending a review state, and configure it. We will we will apply a skip condition for the state, as we don't want to review the invoice that is already reviewed. Then we will place this new pending review state after pending print state. So now we will have the following order: hold, pending email, pending print, pending review, and balanced. And we also need to add some actions configuration here, as we usually do it. We want the action put on hold to be enabled in this new state, and our mark reviewed action is also enabled, and then we want to duplicate it on toolbar and add a primary connotation for this action. So we are ready with the states now, so let's go to the transitions section. First, we need to add transition from our new pending review state to the next state in sequence when marked reviewed action is pressed. And pay attention here that here we do not target some specific state to make it easier to customize workflow later with next customization. This next state will be defined in runtime when all workflow definition will be assembled. Also, we want some tricky thing here. While we're in child state of the sequence, each time onUpdate query event is fired, so any of the observed fields changed, we want to transfer to the beginning of the sequence to find out the most suitable state. So we add a transition from sequence, and this means that we add it for all child states of the sequence to the sequence itself, triggered by our new event handler. In real life, it's not a very good solution because we will recalculate current invoice status on any change in its details or in its discount. So in real life, you should add some meaningful condition here for the performance reasons. So we're almost ready. Now we need to add global actions configuration. We add our marked review action to the workflow, to the screen configuration. We also modify field states. Add this new pending review value for the status field of AR invoice, and we for our user reviewed field, we make it always disabled. And we also need to add our update, add our new onUpdate query orange handler. And that's it. Now we will build it. We'll select a project. Yes, and we'll return back and refresh the screen. And while it is loading, I want to really quickly show you nearly the same code customization, but for 2021 R2 release, where we don't have all these sequences, field update events, and etc. You can see here the code is in general pretty the same, but there are some differences here. First of all, we need to introduce in code event, some event, yes, and we usually do it in Doc classes or cache extension classes, and we don't use it here, in fact. And we have to modify the graph extension class. We add two field updated events here, where we check that one of our properties is changed, yes, and in that case we fire this event manually. The main difference here is in transitions section. So here I have two blocks of transitions, of changes in transitions. First block is for changes in to support reordering of states. We have to modify nearly all states of AR invoice because we need to change the order of transitions in each state and put pending print transition after pending email transition. So here are changes for all 4 states. And also here is the block for changes to add support for one more state. We should also modify nearly all states and add new transition, or sometimes several transitions here. And for our new state pending review, we need to add all transitions to all other states. So here are a lot of transitions, and we must keep in mind the order of transitions here. So you can see that a transition to pending email is defined before the transition to pending print state, because we want to go first to email and then to the pending print. I've spent, I think, about a day to write down this code customization, and there are still some issues with it, so it works not perfect. So let's return back to the browser. Yes,
that gives you a good example of how the finance team convinced the platform team to introduce parent and composite states.
Yeah. So we're ready. Let's create one new invoice here. Select our customer. So we once again on hold state. We select customer and add some details. Let's save it and start the workflow. So you can see that we moved to the email state, not to the pending email state, not to the pending print state. Here we will press the email button and wait for several seconds. And I hope it's sending email somewhere at that moment. Yeah, now we're in pending print state. We will print it. So we can see that the order of states changed. Okay, here is the form. Let's return back. Now we should be in our new on review state, and we have a mark as reviewed button. We will press it and move to the balanced state. So if now we will decide to change something here, for example, in details, I will change the price. Yes, you can see that our document immediately moved to the on review state because field changed, a generated event, workflow subscribed to this event starts working and moved over all states in the sequence once again. And now we are on review state, but the document is not saved yet. So if I press cancel button, we will be back on the balanced. Yes, so if I now press the hold button, we will return to the on hold. And if I remove it from hold, we will return back to balance, keeping in pending email, pending print, and pending review states, because we've already done all of it. And that's all I wanted to show you. And I pass the word back to Doug.
Thank you, Alex. That was great. Thanks for showing the nuts and bolts of how to go through it in a coding perspective. Let me share my screen again. And for those of you who are my customization finished publishing, and for those of you who are wanting to know if I keep my perfect failure rate alive, I can now receive this purchase order. And yes, indeed, I didn't get it right. I forgot to deactivate the release, so I can just bypass my inspection step. and yeah, hold on, I can get rid of that. See, I forgot to do that. I also probably made some other errors. I forgot to label combo box, but in general, things turned out all right. And then the last one is that now that I'm in the inspected state, I forgot to add activate release. So all these little things I come up and catch on the second pass. But anyway, it gives you an idea of the two mechanisms for doing it. And as Alex showed you, the composite states are much easier to manage. I didn't show you those on the in here how to manage composite states, but it's not immediately intuitive, so it's actually just as easy to manage those from code. The other thing is you get things from code sooner than you get them in the UI. So for example, he showed you how when you change the values and amounts, how that could trigger workflows, and so that'll eventually get moved into the code. And the few minutes remaining, I want to talk about a couple things. I want to give you some examples of how people are actually using this, just to get you motivated and figure out how you can do it. And then I want to talk about what's new and what's coming. So this is a company it's a ceramic company, and they export all their goods. They're based out of Sri Lanka, so they typically export a lot of goods. And one of the things that they wanted to do, when they export goods, they needed to get some information for customs, but they really didn't get that until the order status was changed to shipping or completed. They wouldn't get it, and then they needed to use that to print fields out. So they used the workflow engine to enable that scenario, and it worked really well for them. We have another customer here in the US, BNC Fire Safety. They were using field service appointments. After the bill was created, they had the need for people to go add notes to it. So you saw I entered a note to the information after or during, as part of a transition. I had a pop-up dialog that added a note, but they wanted to manually do it so that they could then send the invoice to the customer with maybe recommendations and other things for future enhancements and upselling opportunities. So they did that using the workflow. Gemin Accounting spoke to me about some things they did. They use cases for professional service projects and for billing. And they wanted to have, remember I mentioned that the status is almost always the field that you use when you're doing different workflows. Well, they used the case class to do that. So they had different case classes and wanted to do different workflows for that. So I thought that was an interesting example of that. CRM, we had people that the salespeople need to see things a particular way, so they didn't want the lead status to be, the terms that were in the status to be what it was. They wanted to change it to statuses that they were familiar with. And then they could also do, once again, another example of different flows depending on a class ID for ReproTech. They take things, and depending on whether they're doing pickups or deliveries, they have different workflows to follow on how to trace opportunities. And then here's another one, somebody that's modified the Pix Telecom. They do recycled telecom parts, and they went in, and you can see that they built a new workflow here. This is an actual screenshot of what they did to manage how the shipments process was changed. So we talked a little bit earlier about the history of the workflow engine, and in 22R1, you now have the ability to change field values when entering or leaving a state. I did that I showed that in my demonstration. Alex showed composite states and how you could make it easier to switch back and forth between printing and emailing. And then the financial screens were added. In 22R2, we have some new exciting changes coming up. Of course, I caveat everything with the future date subject to change. We're going to be allowed to change the drop-down field values based on the target state. So if I had my a combo box or something and I wanted, or some other thing that I wanted to use values that came from a future state, that's now going to be possible. Dialog boxes. If I wanted to show different dialog boxes in for a particular action or state, I used to have to, you'd have to create different states or actions for it. Now you have a conditional display, so a dialog box will only display if certain conditions are met. So that's going to be available as well. Non-primary elements, so you might want to set some default values based on when a state, you move from one state to another, or one screen, pop-up boxes and other things, so that's going to be possible. And then one of the things that we're working on, and this one might be 23R1, is to trigger business events from the workflow engine, so that'll be something that's valuable as well. We're ready to go. The workflow engine's here. Hopefully this has got you excited to go start using it. As part of demonstrations, it always receives a warm welcome. People love seeing it and using it. There's a university course you can take. This has recently been published, maybe 4 or 5 months ago. So there's a university course. I opened up this before, where it's an example in Acumatica Help that you can go in and manage everything that you need to see from the state workflow engine. So on behalf of Alex and myself, I'd like to thank you for learning more about what we have done in terms of our new state workflow engine. And Mark, I'll turn it back to you unless there's any quick questions that popped up.